Okay, hi. Thank you everybody for being here. A City in Common is a project that is a joint effort between UCL, a community organization in Bristol called KWMC, an innovation think tank called Ideas for Change, and the City Council of Bristol. And this work has been co-authored by Yvonne Rogers and Carolyn, Hassan, Javi, Creus, Martha Keane, and Paul Marshall. Some of them are here in the room. So with this piece of work, we were trying to create a model to orchestrate civic engagement using sensor technologies to address urban issues. The paper shares both the framework and the implementation of the framework, but due to time constraints, I'm going to today focus on the implementation and the description of the framework. I hope you read it in the paper. So this research takes place in the context of the smart city. In the last decade, we've seen a plethora of urban sensors being deployed in cities to collect data of almost anything from traffic to air quality and so on, and use this data to manage the city in a more efficient way and pursue sustainability dreams. On the one hand, these sensors have been implemented from the top down in smart city programs, most of them being conducted by city councils and corporations, which have often been criticized because they've left humans out of the loop. As you can see in this archetypical picture of the smart city, there's everything but humans. On the other hand, and from the bottom up, the same urban sensing technologies are increasingly being appropriated by citizens at the grassroots level to also collect data about environmental phenomena, city phenomena, to try to address issues of their own concern. In this slide, you can see some examples of citizen sensing technologies. For example, the Smart Citizen Kit that was developed at the Fab Lab Barcelona, which is an open source Arduino-based technology, or the very famous SafeCast that was appropriated by citizens after the nuclear disaster in the Daiichi power plants to collect and share radiation data. So there's something really interesting about citizen sensing, because citizen sensing would allow us to put technologies back in hands of people and data back in hands of people, and empower communities to address issues using this data, rather than having this data in corporate silos and accessible to citizens. However, most citizen sensing programs have been research-led, and just a few of them have achieved sustainability and scalability. Our approach with this project was to try to understand how can urban sensing be appropriated at the grassroots level to address matters of concern, to address priorities that citizens have, and how can community-led urban sensing be scalable and sustainable beyond research interventions. While promising, research shows that there are many challenges that hinder the scalability and sustainability of urban sensing, bottom-up urban sensing interventions. For example, in some cases, the technologies, these open source, do-it-yourself toolkits have not been robust enough, or people lack the skills to set up and maintain sensor technologies, to calibrate them. These citizen-led efforts have been criticized in terms of data accuracy, or people have struggled to make sense of the data. And also we have learned that there is a need to foster social interactions to galvanize communities around sensing technologies that can help each other and can come together to address matters that they care about. And also there is a need to focus on matters that people care about, to foster a sense of purpose that goes beyond the deployment of specific pilots set up to test technologies. So how can we use the knowledge that we have as HCI researchers to put together a framework that would help communities at the grassroots levels and citizens to come together and by themselves organize and deploy a citizen sensing intervention that can help them address local issues? We followed an action research approach with the City Council of Bristol, community organizations, to come up with this model. We are inspired by participatory action research that has been followed by many other researchers to set up community interventions, but we realized that the method of participatory action research was underspecified, and it was very hard for communities that don't have a background in research to be able to understand what should be done in each phase, how one phase leads on to another phase, and what each phase should contribute. So we came up with the City Commons framework for citizen sensing. What this framework does is it scaffolds the complexity of setting up a sensing intervention into 6 phases, and it uses these phases to explain how we can together organize a sensing intervention. It starts with the identification of matters of concern. In many cases, we have seen citizen sensing interventions that starts with technology first and really lack engagement or a struggle to pull engagement. So our approach is to identify things that people care about. After we have identified with these things, these issues, we move on to framing them, which is questioning how can technology help us solve this? So if technology comes after we have a purpose. We also ask, what are the skills needed by citizens to really be able to tackle this? And what is the ecosystem of agents that we need to structure so that we can provide a solution? As you know, urban challenges are wicked problems. And the solution won't come from technology alone. It will come from our capacity to be able to orchestrate complex combinations of social technical systems. That's what we do in the framing section. Then we move to the design phase, where we co-create the technologies that are required to address the issue at stake. And also, because we're talking about sensing technologies and we're going to be collecting data, we assemble the data governance protocols that ensure that communities are in control of the data that they produce, and they choose how this data will be shared and used. We then move on to the deployment phase, where these technologies are deployed in situ, in the wild. It allows us to test the technologies, to understand whether they work, they don't work, how we need to change them, but also to deploy the learning and skills programs that are required for people to make sense of this technology, to make sense of the data, and to use it for their own situated purposes. We then move into the orchestration phase. The orchestration phase is a moment where we open up all these data sets that we gathered, and we allow third parties, data-intensive third parties and experts to help us blend this data, make sense of this data, and move towards a solution. In this phase, we also celebrate. We celebrate the community achievements because this is known to strongly fuel and sustain engagement. And then we moved into the final phase, which is the outcome, where we reflect on the process, whether we as a community have achieved the goals that we set up to achieve, and how we can crystallize the learnings of this process so that it can be reiterated again. At the heart of this Commons framework lies the creation of a city commons, which is a set of community-owned resources. That means that the framing issue will contribute, the framing phase will contribute a map of urban priorities by communities, the deployment, a set of open source technologies and data, and the outcomes, learning on how to run participatory processes. We deployed this framework in Bristol, where we, for 4 months, worked with communities to identify matters of concern. We followed different strategies that you will see in the paper. We identified doing community mappings, conversations in hotspots, and so on, that there were 3 issues that people in Bristol cared about, and they were not currently being addressed by smart city programs. The first one was damp housing. The second was a correlation between biodiversity and mental health. And the third one was footfall in high streets. During the framing phase, we worked with communities and groups to assess what of these 3 issues pulled more engagement, and we identified that damp housing was by far the one that had most momentum. A lot of people in Bristol were affected by damp, and the problem is that damp is not just a very ugly stain in your wall. Damp correlates to respiratory disease. It can lead to fuel poverty because people spend more money trying to warm up the house, etc. And it also carries social stigma. So the community decided to assemble around this matter of concern, and they called themselves Damp Busters. During the design process, they realized that they needed to do 2 things. One, to create a mapping tool that would allow them to map the scale of the problem by allowing people to contribute data on in the map where they were and what type of dump they have, and also to create these very cute temperature and humidity sensors that they labeled as the frog box, in order to, by measuring temperature and humidity, identify whether they had moisture or damp. Why? Because moisture is a problem that can be related to your habits. For example, drying the clothes on the heater, do not do it. Or having a shower without opening the window, and that's not structurally damp. Whereas if you, with a specific algorithm, we can use the data from the frog to see if you have real damp. Now, if you have real damp, then we need to move on towards a solution. The problem is when the house is rented, for example, and in a situation like England, where the prices of the houses go up and up, up, then there's no incentive for the landlords to repair the damp. So who deals with the problem? So we started focusing on this type of cases, and we then deployed our technologies in houses that were severely affected by damp, but we also deployed a number of workshops aimed at supporting communities in developing the skills that were needed to make sense of the data, assemble the sensors, and so on. This included programs at schools, at hacker spaces, and so on. During the orchestration phase, we had a lot of data altogether. We also convinced the City Council to come on board and give us more data. We had a number of data jam sessions and how do you call them? These hackathons and so on. And we were able to identify various things by being able to combine different data sets. For example, we can map the houses with damp, but then the City Council gave us access to the land registry data. And guess what we learned then? Who were the landlords that were renting houses with damp? And all of a sudden, the community had a lot of power. And then we were also able to identify in which cases the City Council could intervene and mediate this relationship. So the orchestration phase allowed us to bring together a lot of stakeholders interested in solving the problem, either because they didn't want to be shamed or because they genuinely wanted to help address it, and create a new contract. By the end of the 10-month implementation, we had a number of interesting outcomes. Some business opportunities emerged. For example, some housing associations were interested in buying the frogs, so a member of the community that had been involved with delivering the frogs decided to start a business, and he made the humidity geckos, also at a Fab Lab and open source. And this was possible because we were creating commons, which were open source technologies that could be easily forked and appropriated. We also contributed to the City Commons, to the GitHub, the open source design of the frog boxes and the design of the casings that can also be appropriated and reused. The community learned a number of skills, which led to more community capital and data literacy. And also we created new networks and social capital that allow us to more easily move together towards the delivery of a solution. And also we created open data that is now available for others who may want to investigate potential solutions to the problem of damp. The City Council came on board, and a number of organizations like energy, fuel poverty organizations, and so on decided to come together to work in the dam busting project to help address the problem. So what we learn is that the framework was actually a very successful tool in terms of engaging different members of a community that were working together to address an identified matter of concern. It also enabled the collaboration among diverse stakeholders and the co-design of these community-led sensing technologies by allowing people to follow together a series of phases that lead to a desired output. It became a narrative tool, and this is something that we learned when we were interviewing people. We realized that the focus on the city common, the idea of co-producing together community-shared resources, truly fostered a sense of contributive behavior. and made the community come together because they felt like they were doing something positive, and the results of what they were doing were not going to be exploited by third parties or companies. They owned them, and this gave them a strong sense of ownership and entitlement that fueled engagement. We learned that the framework, because it was so easy to follow and it allowed them to orchestrate clearly the actions, became a lingua franca. And it allowed the community organization to drive the process that entailed this very intricate social, political, technological dynamics in a way that made sense for the community and everybody could follow. However, we also learned that this framework is not a solution to everything per se. There are a number of considerations that need to be taken into account for a framework of this type to be applied. We learned that it is crucial to start with a matter of concern. Most of the citizen sensing programs have started technology first because we have this tool, let's go and start sensing things and then see what we can do with this data. Well, that's very unlikely to drive engagement, because people are more interested in addressing a matter of concern than in participating just per se. So this is crucial, and how you do it is very complex. And matters of concern imply some urgency. People want to solve this. People don't want to waste time. And so, of course, this means that a lot of work needs to be done in terms of mediating and so on. We also learned that it's very important for researchers to really sit back and resist the urge to control and manage everything. If we really want to create sustainable interventions, you have to put people first and let them in control. But we have, as HCR researchers, amazing knowledge and skills that can help communities tackle problems. We can advise in types of technology. We can support in data literacy. And we also learned that adopting a commons approach was crucial to foster pro-social behavior and to really create a narrative that galvanized people in doing something together and feeling like they were not going to be exploited. There's this wave in HCI now where many of us working in civic interventions are looking at designing sustainable interventions that we can hand off, toolkits that will empower people to do their own thing, to appropriate technologies for their own goals. So for us to see the sustainability of our process, to see appropriation as a form of measuring success. The City Commons approach is currently being used in a number of projects and interventions. It has made it all the way to South Korea. It's been labeled the Bristol approach. It's now become a program for schools where kids learn how to do IoT devices and work on the frameworks and learn how to deploy them and use them. And it's also being used as a toolkit in the Living Labs network by other projects like Making Sense and Replicate EU in order to orchestrate large-scale community engagement projects. What this means, I think, is that it is possible that we do not control the interventions, but rather contribute what we know to really foster positive change. Thank you.
Hi, Heather Patterson, Intel Labs. First, just thank you. This was lovely. It's a lovely framework, nice research. My question is about data circulation and flow and privacy, and I'm wondering if and how you might have incorporated those types of concerns into your framework. I don't know exactly what damp entails or how it's different from moisture, but as you noted, there's social stigma related to this, and it may lower property values, and anyone whose data is in that open data
in the design phase is not only to design the technologies, but also the governance protocol for the data. And we use different mechanisms like liquid democracy or voting and so on to make sure that the community understands that your data also says a lot about your neighbor. For example, sometimes you have damp in your house, but it actually comes from the house next door. So by you sharing this data, also can affect others. So there needs to be a collaborative process of data governance. So they created their own governance treaty that they agreed with. And for example, this entailed not geolocating exactly where the data was, but in a radius, in an area. And also them deciding who they wanted to share the data, the non-anonymized data with. And they, for example, decided that they wanted to share with the city council because they wanted the city council to take action and not openly. And they definitely didn't want to share it with third parties that could commercially exploit it. In a new project that I'm running right now, we are using the blockchain and smart contracts to be able to assign licenses and enact them in a much more trust-aware fashion.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
Cheers.
Okay, this will be uncharacteristically quick. So, Lizzie, I want to ask, you haven't said very much about the communities you were working with, and I wonder if you have, from your experiences, any guidance with respect to either the scales at which this framework works well or doesn't, and also the necessity of any kind of like pre-existing community infrastructure.
Brilliant. This is a crucial question, and I could talk for 20 minutes about that, but I won't. So, two things. One is, and this could be very controversial, we tend to work with pre-existing communities. That's an easy way around, because you can find them, you can go and visit them, and bring them into. But the problem is that pre-existing communities have also a lot of pre-existing ideas of how to solve things. And when you want to drive a process of real innovation and find new solutions to existing problems, you might be better off in terms of engaging an emergent community that will emerge around the matter of concern. So the common goal that unites these people is to find a solution to the problem, not to blame this or that one because I've had issues in the past and so on. So the focus is much more on the issue itself and solving it. And we did that. And in the paper, we share a lot of different strategies. For example, conversations in hotspots. We went recruiting people in bingos, cafes, nail parlors, and we engaged in conversations and tried to pull together a community that shared the matter of dump together.
Thank you very much.